We're live, and this is Pullquote. I'm JP from Book of Hours.
And I'm Julie.
And she's also from Book of Hours. And today we're excited to have on our program Paul Cudenec. We've been We've been looking forward to this program in particular. Let me give you a little background on Paul. He's a longtime English journalist and community activist who 8 years ago went off to live in the French countryside. And we will stop that, and write books about anarchist metaphysics. But the political world caught up with him, and in recent years, he has been busy reporting on Gilets jaunes, the Yellow Vest protests, exposing climate capitalists, and denouncing the Great Fascist Reset via the Winter Oak website. He's the author of quite a few books, both fiction and nonfiction, including The Anarchist Revelation, Antibodies, Archangels, and other essays, and The Fakir of Florence, a novel in 3 layers, and his latest, Enemies of the World. Paul releases a lot of his work through the Acorn, which can be found online, and his latest Acorn piece is Somber Truths Behind Bright Green Lies.
Hello. And Paul's writings have been featured on The Wrong Kind of Green and Off Guardian and many other platforms. So the article that has increased his popularity in the last few months is Klaus Schwab and his Great Fascist Reset. And we've been inspired by his writings ever since. And so we're very excited to have Paul as a guest on Pullquote. Welcome, Paul.
Hello.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Welcome. Thank you. So the first thing we want to do is say that we're very excited. We've been following you on Twitter for a while now. We first learned of you in, I want to say, around 2019.
Yeah.
When you
it was on Wrong Kind of Green, it was what you published back in April, and I can't think of the title of that particular piece.
But it was regarding the green fascism that's just around the corner. So
yeah, that was the first sign really in the last few years that something was going badly wrong. Was all the climate capitalism stuff, which Cory Morningstar was very much still is very much in the forefront of exposing all that. So exactly. I sort of joined in with those general efforts in trying to draw people's attention to what was going on.
Good.
Right. Well, because I was reading all her pieces about Greta Thunberg around that time, and so I was cruising through the various articles that were current on Wrong Kind of Green, and I found yours, and was like, wow, finally,
right.
A voice I can relate to.
Right.
And I mean, the whole thing with Extinction Rebellion was really well, let's put it this way. We watched a program with Chris Hedges, and he interviewed them, the guy from Extinction Rebellion, and I thought, this just smells wrong. This just does not feel right.
What it felt like was a co-optation of an authentic anarchist movement.
Or an authentic green movement.
Or an authentic green movement.
Yeah.
And it felt like, once again, the true anarchist or anarchism ideology was once again pushed to the side and co-opted, and something else was put in its place. Can you comment on something like that?
Yeah, I mean, Extinction Rebellion has never claimed to be anarchist, but it certainly claims to be environmentalist, obviously, and a lot of people involved in it are genuine. I'm sure they're genuine. I mean, I know people. Well, I know people from the past who have become involved with it, but the problem is that its goals are not the goals of genuine environmentalism. When you look at what they're actually calling for, and that applies to the whole of the so-called climate justice movement, because all they're doing is asking the government to take action. And obviously, as an anarchist, we might have problems with that approach anyway. But It goes a bit further, in that what they're asking the government to do is to pour money in the form of subsidies into a certain industry, into business. It's not talking about protecting nature. It's talking about saving capitalism, essentially, which is what Cory Morningstar has been saying for years, of course. And
Right.
And with Extinction Rebellion, it became obvious quickly that there was something not quite right. And the key turning point was when a website suddenly appeared called XR Business, which was business leaders vowing their undying support for Extinction Rebellion. There was a letter to the Times in London at the same time. And I know that this created quite a stir amongst many of the activists who were involved at that very moment. I think were camped out in central London, and a delegation of them went to see the there is a leadership. There is a leadership of Extinction Rebellion, even though they might not like to admit it. A delegation of ordinary grassroots activists went to speak to the people who were taking more of a leading role, and objected to this website. And the website itself disappeared the day after we published an article about it, and other people obviously have been talking about it. But the reality behind the website is still there. It didn't. The reality
Right.
doesn't go away. It's just the evidence that was whisked away from under our noses.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that reminds me also of another piece that you were writing. It was I think it was like last May 2020, and you were talking about the disappearance of true anarchist action, on the part of people in the movement, and you were describing a situation. I think it was like a G7 or G20 kind of meeting. It was in Northern England or Scotland, and it was around the same time as the London bombings, which like usurped the whole protest that was going on.
Yeah, it was exactly the same time. We were. It was in Scotland, in Stirling, a mobilisation against the G8. I think it was the G8 at the time.
Okay.
And yeah, it was very strange because people had come from all over Europe to take part in this mobilisation, and then on the 7th of July, 2005. Word came to us on the campsite that there had been these bomb attacks in London, and suddenly people started talking about stopping the protests.
Right.
And they convened barrio meetings. Barrios being the areas of the campsite where people were sort of decentralized into these sort of zones where we tried to organize amongst ourselves. And the idea was to discuss whether we could continue or not in the face of this thing that had happened in London, which was obviously nothing to do with us and didn't alter the reality of the global capitalism which we were opposing.
Right.
And I know, I mean, obviously none of us could see what was going on in all these meetings at once, but certainly in our meeting, nobody wanted to stop. I mean, that's what we were there for. We've been planning on this. We've been planning this for months. And I heard from other people later that other people were of the same opinion. And yet somehow through this sort of process, which was supposed to be transparent and democratic, but was in fact entirely mysterious and invisible from outside of certain inner circles, it was decided that no, it wasn't appropriate to carry on protesting against international capitalist leaders meeting up the road.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it sounds to me like there were maybe some influencers that kind of slipped in and did some behind the scenes discussions.
Yeah, well, we know for a fact that somebody who was later exposed as a police spy was involved in those sort of inner echelons at the time. So I'm not saying it was all down to him, but I never came up with an explanation for this. I've sort of put it together with a number of other things that have happened, and you start to see the pieces of the jigsaw. Something was going wrong even at that stage.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things that we wanted to bring up that we thought were that could carry on what you just said. That could
Go ahead.
Should I bring up this part?
Yeah.
Okay. So based on what you just said, so there's a quote in here that really struck me in. Is that the right?
It's right here, the divide, rule.
The divide, rule, and profit, the intersectional impact racket. So one of the most important insights of authentic anarchist philosophy is that the human species is one entity. Its rich and necessary diversity, we insist, is part of an overall coherence and commonality as a clearly definable living organism. I have been shocked, therefore, in recent years to see so many anarchists embrace intersectionality, sometimes referred to more broadly as identity politics. This way of seeing the world is, in my view, entirely incompatible with the anarchist vision to the extent of representing its inversion. So much about that quote spoke to us personally because years ago we had a conversation as we were learning more and more about anarchism. And I had said, well, JP, what's the difference between intersectionality and identity politics? And we really couldn't find a response, in any literature that really defined that for us. But this quote really helped us understand. Would you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I said it all, didn't I? I suppose. I think that the idea of humanity as one entity is an important one, and it seems central to anarchism, and yet it is denied by this idea of dividing people up into different groups and different ethnicities. I'm just saying the same thing, but less well here, in fact.
Yeah.
But, to me, it seems essential that there is a humanism, a sense of what the human species is, and I would call that human species an organism as well. And to me, that is something that should be part of anarchism, but isn't really. I mean, this is, and we I could go back there to the reason why I first started writing books about how I see anarchism, is that I feel that there are some essential elements of what anarchism is that have somehow dropped off the spectrum of what contemporary anarchists talk about and write about. Yeah, well, that's one of them. And Antibodies was the first essay that I wrote, which later was included in this book here. And what part of the basis for that is Kropotkin, Peter Kropotkin, who was really is one of the main stalwarts of anarchist philosophy, and who is always acknowledged as being that. He's never been cast out of the anarchist school of thought, I don't think, by anybody. As far as I know. He's pretty untouchable. But he was writing when he wrote Mutual Aid, which was his best known work. He was responding to social Darwinism. So it wasn't so much what Darwin said, but what other people said using Darwin's theories, and which was you know about this, but I mean it was a right-wing theory saying that nature is basically everyone against everyone else, and it's the survival of the fittest. And that later became used by the sort of proto-Nazi thinkers into justifying their even eugenics ultimately, but the idea that there are natural leaders in society and natural losers, and it's right that losers in society, not just different from different races from the Nazi point of view, but even within the German folk, that the less capable elements would be crushed under the glorious wheels of ongoing history and so on. So there was the start of that horrible, nasty right-wing school of thinking which uses nature to justify its own exploitation and domination. So Kropotkin obviously rightly saw the danger in that, and wrote a left-wing version of that, an anarchist version of nature, in which he said that he wasn't denying that nature existed. He was saying that no, nature, when you look at nature and human evolution as part of that nature, because we are nothing else but part of that nature, has all been about the necessity for cooperation and mutual aid as the means of survival. Without that, no species of animal or insect or plant would ever survive. Particularly within its own species, but also as part of a symbiosis, as a general part of nature. That the whole of nature and humankind necessarily has been about working together with others, as not being separated individuals or groups, but as being part of a greater whole. Because without that, we wouldn't survive. Right. And so he turned the whole thing around, which is a brilliant and important task that he carried out there, to have turned it around and to have countered this right-wing ideological offensive.
Well, I think even Darwin pointed out in his own writings that that the species that cooperated were the ones that succeeded.
Yeah.
And yet the conveniently the right-wing Darwin. But I forget you said it a moment ago, and I know it. But what was it? The
social Darwinists.
Social Darwinists. Thank you. Conveniently left that out, right? And went with what they perceived as what Darwin was saying, which often happens in any whenever you have someone who's a thought leader or a guru or somebody who is very in the forefront of new ideas and thoughts. A lot of times their ideas will get changed and used in their own way, in the way that the people want it to be used. You see that in religion.
It'll have the opposite effect.
Yeah.
They had this. Go
on.
Already. Oh, we're cutting across each other. Go on, Julie.
Oh no, I was just going to say that I think JP had something he wants to read of yours, and then we'll expand on that as well.
So it goes back to what we're talking about, the bright green, your latest piece, which is actually just a review. I mean, not just a review, but it's a review of a new book. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time on the book necessarily, but your response to it. What I liked was, wishful thinking lies at the heart of general blindness regarding the severity of the problem. People simply don't want to believe that things are really that bad. That they might really have to leave behind the plastic security of the industrial womb and face raw and natural reality. As consumers, we have been conditioned not to think too much about where anything comes from and how it is made. Guilt is not good for sales. And then, you go on after a quote from the book, which is good, but I want to just kind of skip ahead. They know that their message is not one that most people want to hear. And I've certainly been seeing that over the last 20, 25 years for myself.
And especially now.
But especially now.
People they don't want to accept reality.
No, on many levels, yes.
Yeah.
But especially in regard to, what you're describing here and what they're talking about in the book, it's like most people think that, oh, well, I recycle and so I'm doing my part. Whereas, what we saw Julie and I both saw in the, the green capitalist or the natural capitalist movement is, they're focusing on, a better way of packaging, compostable packaging and, less bad.
As opposed to focusing on industrial capitalism.
Right, the cause of the problem.
The real crux of the problem.
Yeah, it's always just less bad, isn't it? And the same is true, actually, of so-called anti-capitalism, because it's not really about getting rid of this system we're in now. It's just about changing it to make it slightly nicer and more inclusive. This is this intersectionality thing. It's just ignoring the big picture. It's just a nightmare direction the whole world's going, and it's pretending that if only we could just get a few more of those people into positions of responsibility, and if only we could just change the way people talk about this or that, then everything will be fine. Everything will be fine. We can just carry on.
You started breaking up there a moment, and if you could speak up a little louder, I think we'll all hear you better.
Yeah, but we got what you said. I just want to make sure that, yes.
Well, along those lines, wow, I just lost my train of thought. But I think one of the things that I've been noticing lately, and it's especially with the people that they're talking about in Green Lives, or I'm sorry, Green Lies, Bright Green Lies, they actually call their movement, bright green or light green,
right?
And I met some people who, that's how they describe themselves, and it was like, okay. So they were more concerned about, phantom power in your light socket, when you leave things plugged in. But one of the things that I've been noticing lately is that people are really focusing on plastic pollution as opposed to pollution that actually makes plastic.
Right. So the compounds of plastic in the factories that make the plastic are more toxic to the environment versus the unrecyclable plastic.
Or just plastic in general. They're talking about plastic that's thrown away and things like that, right. But they're only looking at the end result as opposed to
where it begins.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that often seems to be the case, doesn't it? There's this very fragmented way of seeing things. I think that would be one of my critiques of the modern way of thinking overall, is that people can't see the wood for the trees, as we say. They have always too much focus on the detail and not enough stepping back and seeing that bigger picture.
Right.
And that seems to be a big theme in your work in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To kind of go off into another territory, a quote that really grabbed me from this book, The Anarchist Revelation, was the following: "The anarchist does not merely stray outside the framework of acceptable thinking, as carefully assembled by the prevalent system. She smashes it to pieces and dances on the wreckage." So
really likes that part.
I love that quote so much. Obviously, my inner feminist is coming out. So
I was channeling Emma Goldman there, I think. Very much like Emma Goldman, and that was her speaking across the decades, I think.
Right, especially the dancing, right?
Yeah, she smashes it to pieces and dances on the wreckage. So I think that what really, let me see if I can get this right. I think what my interpretation of this quote is that it's not something that, that anarchism isn't something that's going to come out of something else. It's not going to be as a result of something. It just is on its own, and it can actually give birth to, new schools of thought and new ways of living. You don't necessarily need, this great capitalist reset or this great reset into neo-slavery in order for anarchism to be born. It can just, it's already there. Maybe I'm misinterpreting it. Maybe that's just my personal take on it. But it stands on its own throughout the test of time, no matter if we're living in an enlightened age or in a dark age,
Yeah, I think, it's that's my view of what I see anarchism.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
We lost
controversial view for anarchist circles. It's quite a controversial view to take, I suppose, in certain anarchist circles, because there's also an argument that anarchism is a very specific political movement which arose as part of the class struggle in the industrial part of the 19th century and has continued thereafter. To me, that is also anarchism, but anarchism is also, to me, that is something that's contained within the bigger philosophy, the bigger way of thinking, which I call anarchism. It's not that I don't agree with the political form. It's just that I think it has its place as just a specific manifestation of something much larger, which goes way beyond politics. It's a way of and which links into so many other different ideas, like religious or metaphysical ideas, which is why I wrote the Anarchist Revelation, because I was just excited to find all the different writers and schools of thought which were saying things in the way that I see them, and which I can see are very directly related to the anarchist way of viewing life and the world. So I'm not the only anarchist who traces anarchism back way beyond the 19th century. There are a lot of anarchist writers who've talked about its origins in medieval Christian rebellions, or in Taoism in China, and and Sufism as well. It's particularly interested me to see the parallels. So it's not something I've invented, but it's something that interests me greatly, and I thought deserved to be widely aired in anarchist circles, which seemed to me to become rather blinkered and rather boring. I was finding the sort of anarchist discourse was just like just mind-numbingly cliched. You can't just remain always on the same level of pragmatic day-to-day activism and meetings and leaflets. You've got to have a bit of intellectual stimulation somewhere, haven't you? Something that drives your soul, that feeds your soul,
Right.
And that seemed to be missing for me, which is what I've been trying to spread a little bit over the last few years.
Right. When did you first feel this stirring? Was it when you were much younger, or I'm just curious, and I know our audience is very curious too.
The stirring to spread anarchist ideas.
Yeah.
Sure, or start writing.
Well, I've been an anarchist since I was in my since about 30, I think. I think I might have been anarchist before, but I didn't know. But I discovered I was an anarchist.
Yeah.
That's usually how it happens. Yeah.
And started hanging around the anarchist book fairs in London,
Right.
trying to pick up, as much information as I could, doing a lot of reading. There were some anarchist magazines which I read at the time, which inspired me as well. And eventually I found the confidence to start calling myself an anarchist without fear of being contradicted by people who already knew what anarchism was, And we formed a group, and we formed an anarchist group where I lived, in the town where I lived. I don't know, perhaps everybody wasn't exactly an anarchist, but we were more or less anarchist. And eventually it became an anarchist thing, and we started doing anarchist meetings. This started in the last part of the 90s. And we had monthly meetings, which we started around 1998, and which carried on till about 2012. And weekly street stalls, anarchist street stalls, which carried on for about 10 years or 12 years, I think. Nearly every Saturday, we'd sit up there with a table of anarchist leaflets and in the town centre and meet people, and we're a bit of a fixture. And then we'd be giving out leaflets advertising our latest campaigns, all the different things we're involved in, all the different meetings and so on. So I was really immersed in practical anarchism, in local anarchism. Mm-hmm. And that was what I thought I had to, that's what I thought was the right thing to do. Partly because I didn't feel at that stage, I was quite new, relatively new as an anarchist. So I didn't feel that it was my place to start pontificating about what anarchism really was or what I thought it should be. It was just to get on with being an anarchist and doing it on the grassroots level.
Just get to work, yeah.
I'm talking about it, meeting, and they were talking to a lot of anarchists, obviously, a lot of other anarchists over the years, and gradually having an idea of what it really was. And I think I had that, obviously, after all those years. But then turning around and looking at the wider anarchist milieu and saying, oh, hang on, maybe I've got something to contribute to that wider sphere now that I've done the groundwork, now that I've proved that I'm not just some armchair anarchist that has drifted in and is going to put the intellectual world to rights from some dubious position of intellectual, so-called intellectual superiority or something like that. You know, I felt that I'd earned the right to say something after all those years.
Well, sure,
absolutely.
Especially after the activism of practical anarchy, right?
Right.
What was the reception you guys would get out there, in the square with your leaflets?
No, it was always encouraging. I think it was always encouraging that, and it's not the people who you think will be interested. I think when we first started setting up our stalls, we were looking at all the the sort of teenagers going past and thinking, oh, they'll be into anarchy. There was once we saw a young bloke with an anarchy symbol T-shirt coming towards us, and we were like, right, oh, he's going to definitely come over and have a chat, but he didn't. He walked straight past without even looking, and I don't know if he noticed us or if he was really just liked the T-shirt and didn't know what it meant.
Right.
And the people that did come were often the least likely suspects.
Right.
Often older people, some of whom had been involved in anarchism in their younger years, some of them whom hadn't, and were just interested, and other people who were pretty much apolitical, who just thought it was interesting, who just. And that was the thing that always struck us with what we did. That we weren't actually appealing to people who already had a political label. We were appealing to people who had a sense of what was right and wrong,
right,
and and could relate to what we were saying often about specific issues. No, the council shouldn't be doing that. No, they shouldn't be developing that woodland. We want to protect that woodland. Right. No, you're right that we should do everything we should, and it was much broader than perhaps some people who are very much trapped within the anarchist scene might imagine. It didn't have to be aimed at people who are already in a certain niche or in a certain very narrow way of thinking.
Yeah,
we found that in our own work.
Yeah, for sure.
We don't aim at an anarchist audience, but we bring in ideas and concepts.
Yeah.
And we mention now and then that we that we are anarchist, and some people get surprised by that, and other people are fine. They roll with it.
Yeah. Do you find that your philosophy? I know this is what we find, that the philosophy of anarchism tends to roll over and intersect with even some conservative viewpoints. And this is all kind of bubbled up in the age of COVID, so to speak, where, all of the things that you just said, I want to protect the woodland. I want to give, individuals more rights to, do what they need to do to survive. All of these philosophies and these thoughts about, the state having too much power, is shared with people who are of a conservative nature as well. And we were shocked to find comrades, if you will, in that. Have you found that as well?
Well, yeah, definitely. Over the last year or so, it's been quite remarkable.
Yeah.
There were signs of it before, I suppose. Yeah, in the campaigns that I've talked to you about. Yeah, we were, we understood that it wasn't necessarily a left-right thing to want to protect the countryside. Obviously, it's not. And we were, you'll fight alongside all sorts of people for specific aims, and and sometimes it wasn't. It was more. There was a big anti-war movement at the time of the Iraq War, and and there we were marching alongside the local Muslims from the mosque and so on, and we don't share the same political philosophy, but you ally with people who you feel are feeling the same things as you at the same time. But this last year, it's been really remarkable, really notable, and it's it's made me think that perhaps I've been a bit narrow in the past in wanting to avoid having not wanting to compromise what I'm saying by having too much to do with people who aren't fully on board with all the anarchist thinking. It's slightly makes you feel slightly humble to realize that maybe, you know, there's a thing about being left wing that there's this tendency to be a little bit self-righteous, maybe, to think that we're the enlightened ones, and these other people, where they're not quite up to our level of wisdom. So I think it's quite salutary to be taken down a peg or two in that respect.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
I think that what did you?
Well, I was just going to say we're all feeling that in that what you just described. That these people, we can relate to these people, even though we consider them our enemies or people that we didn't really want to.
We didn't really align with in the past.
Yeah. I think everybody's feeling that right now. Even people on the other side are feeling that as well.
Right. I think one of the articles that kind of put you into this position that we're talking about right now,
for sure,
which is where we all relate, whether we come from a conservative background or more liberal or progressive or anarchist or even Marxist background. One article of yours brought it all together. Klaus Schwab and his Great Fascist Reset, which I believe was shared by, was this article, oh, sorry, JP went to go get our kitty cat. Was this article also shared on Off Guardian as well?
Yeah, it was, and a number of other places, I think.
Yes, many people. I actually did a quick browser search for the title of this article that you wrote, Klaus Schwab and his Great Fascist Reset, and you would be surprised how many hits I got. It's been shared and reshared on conservative sites, on liberal, on progressive sites. So I think that is, I think what this does is it demonstrates where we are in the human experience, as I like to call it. Everybody is feeling the same thing, and we're all just kind of coming together from all of our different places,
Yeah, well, we have to, don't we? Because it's that's what happens in an emergency. You can't stand on all the niceties of checking that somebody else agrees with every other single thing that you agree with. You've got to, it's just, I mean, it's not so much the article that is important, is of knowing that Klaus Schwab has said all those things, which is incredible, isn't it? That he's actually put all that out there in public in those books, and yet when people like me describe what he said, it's regarded by some on the who defend the system as being so-called conspiracy theory. But he said all that. That's what's so remarkable. It's all in plain sight, and
that's what you find oftentimes is the case. They will say outright what they intend to do.
Yes,
if you know where to look.
Right. If you know how to.
Who's going to read that? Most people are never going to read that.
Right.
I mean, it was only somebody sent me the ebooks and said, well, you might want to take a look at this.
One of our followers sent us a print copy.
One of our followers gifted us a bunch of books anonymously, and so I was trying to figure out who did it. It was kind of funny. Finally, she made herself known. So thank you, Tracy, for that. Yeah. But so we one of the other things too that we wanted to kind of talk about is how do you? There's so many different going back to what you said before. There are so many people who are playing anarchist. They wear the T-shirts with the A, with the A symbol.
Sort of like Bookchin's lifestyleism.
Right. So it becomes kind of, like you just said, like lifestyleism. How do you speak to those people? How would you, to try to, I mean, obviously you don't want to go changing people, but I don't know. I'm finding it more and more challenging. To be honest. And I feel that true anarchism, the philosophy of it, like I said at the beginning of this, this conversation with you, is it feels like it's being pushed to the margins or being co-opted into something that it's not.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just to come back to what I was saying about Kropotkin at the beginning there, this idea of nature, that the whole of his anarchist ideology was based on our belonging to nature and what kind of belonging to nature that was. But there is a certain type of very contemporary anarchism which says that we don't belong to nature, and that you can't talk about any human nature. When you use the word innate, I mean he's talking about the innate propensity to mutual aid, the innate capacity for cooperation and working with each other. But the word innate is a no-no in certain circles, because no, we're all born blank slates. Everything is education. You can't talk about any essence to anything, because that's essentialism. Or there's this sort of this strange block on what to me are the roots of real anarchist thinking, being denied by people who are calling themselves anarchists. And it just means that they can't actually understand. To me, they just can't understand the philosophy which they're claiming to represent.
Right.
They're not anarchists, because they've just latched onto just the surface of something which doesn't actually make any sense without the rest of it. Right. It doesn't make any sense to say you want to do away with government, if indeed they do say they want to do away with government. And perhaps that's why some of these are now saying, oh yeah, but we need the state to protect us because of COVID. Freedom Press in London talking about, maybe the state wasn't such a bad thing after all. This is supposed to be an anarchist bastion of anarchist thinking and publications.
Well, Kropotkin was one of the founders of
the newspaper. He was one of the founders. So maybe that's why they can now say that, because they haven't understood that the reason why we don't need the state is that because we have a natural ability to work together without the state. That human society is like all natural society. It's organic. It functions from below. That's how it works. We don't need authority. And in fact, we don't want authority, because all that authority does, it comes in and ruins the natural equilibrium. I won't use that word because I can't pronounce it. The natural organic reality that we share. It comes in and it spoils that. It stops us from developing normally amongst ourselves and tries to impose its own structures. And if you can't understand that, you're going to be helpless when it comes to explaining to people why they shouldn't fall under the spell of the state, because you haven't got it.
Yeah, well, we found. I'm sorry. We found, that's especially characteristic of a lot of the Facebook groups that are out there. I got involved with several of them at one point, and there's one in particular, and I'm not going to say who it is, but they were very much like what you described, how they were looking at the surface level of things. They were very much opposed to certain types of anarchism, but they were okay with others. They were fine with transhumanists being part of the group, but not anarcho-primitives or anti-civs, and they were very adamant about that.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
And in a lot of these kind of shallow anarchist groups, there isn't a lot of discussion about class. I think we can learn a lot from the working class. I think the working class embodies the action, the direct action of, fighting for their rights, fighting for enough, money to take care of their families and their lives. I think that, the class discussion is not brought into many anarchist circles these days, and I think it needs to come back.
Yeah, it's. I was certainly at a very practical level. It was part of my education as a young adult, was not having much money, and having to feed. I had kids, and having to feed them on very little money, and yet being in a part of the world where a lot of people seem to have a lot of money and were driving around in big cars and living in big houses in the countryside, where I would have loved to have lived in the countryside, but you can't even live in the countryside and really in the south of England without being quite well off. And that sharpens your social critique to be in that position of realizing that there isn't social justice. There isn't any social justice
No.
in our society.
Right.
And there's maybe some of these people who don't talk about that is because they're quite comfortably off. Thank you very much. They're which is why they've got this luxury of being able to think about other strange issues and to dream about turning human beings into cyborgs or whatever the transhumanists have in mind. I mean, yeah, there's a real disconnect from any sort of reality on any level.
Right.
I think, on the level of our natural reality, on the level of our social reality, and it's just some sort of strange, weird cult which has taken the name of anarchism, but which has got nothing to do with what most of us would understand it to be.
Yeah, in fact, it's funny because I mean, my experience with anarchism has kind of come full circle. I was introduced to it in the 80s, and then it kind of like rolled out of my life. It was one of those things. It's like, oh well, we saw each other when we were in school, but we broke up after. It was
kind of like that.
Kind of like that. And then it came back to me later in life. And but what I found was this marked contrast between what I experienced in the 80s and what I was experiencing with these folks, in these Facebook groups, and also what I'd been finding online, in general and reading things. Took me a long time to find the voice that I originally knew from, all those years past.
This might seem a little out of left field, but I'm curious, given your location in history and the times you gave us, I'm thinking the 90s, did you ever run across David Graeber at all, or was he not part of the movements that you were part of?
No, I haven't. I don't think I've ever met him. No, I mean, I've known people who've known him.
Yeah.
I've never met him to my knowledge. I mean, I might have done before he was famous or something.
Right.
But,
just I was just curious. Had he lived, I think he would be more. I think he would be more on our side now.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, he was at the Chaz, so, holding that up, and I was kind of concerned about that.
Yeah, he was. Are you familiar with Chaz, with what that was?
During the summer?
No.
Last summer at all? No.
Not really.
It was a part of Seattle. What was that? What, Capitol Hill?
Right.
Seattle?
So there's a neighborhood in Seattle, Washington, called Capitol Hill. Right.
Yeah, it was a sort of temporary autonomous zone, wasn't it?
Exactly.
It wasn't really. It was not real at all.
And I felt like he went there and visited and kind of lifted it up, and I was concerned about that because we saw right through it right from the beginning.
Right.
In fact, we included some footage from somebody speaking at the Chaz in our communitarian video, I believe.
Communitarianism.
Yeah.
So I think, anyway, I feel that maybe, this is a little off the subject, but maybe after he was there, he realized that it was not an authentic movement. But he died, so quite soon after that.
Yeah.
So they can't tell us about it now.
Yeah. So anyway, I was just curious about that. What else? I wanted to say something else. Did you have to?
Yeah. Well, I was curious. I noticed that John Zerzan not only gave your book a boost, but he actually quoted or said something about. It wasn't just a quote. It's like he said something about your book in his book, and so I was curious, at what point did you find your way into sort of the green anarchist tendency, or even having any sort of conversations or relationship with John Zerzan?
I haven't actually I've never had a conversation with John Zerzan.
Okay.
He's I've read all his books, and he's read one of mine. So
good enough.
That's as far as it goes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've always been. I've been influenced by him and Derek Jensen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's going back. You know, they were very popular, weren't they? They were in the circles I was moving in. They were quite very influential back in the late 90s. Oh well, not Derek Jensen. That would have been Zirzan, and then Derek Jensen a few years later. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know what to say. He was. I've met him, but as part of the audience in a meeting. He came over to London. I don't know when, early part of the century, I suppose. And but it was terrible. He was. And there was another meeting. No, I've been in the audience twice. You know, I've obviously. I'm exaggerating to say I've never met him, but I haven't got a one-to-one relationship with him. I've asked a question or two, but you know, I don't know. And but the first time I saw him in London, it was quite horrible because he was coming under the sort of attack that you were describing on these websites, where you know, there was a certain sect, even then, a certain group on the London anarchist scene who was violently hostile to anything that was so, you know, primitivist. And they were just, I hated it because they were just, you know, he's in, whether you agree with him or not, he's obviously an intelligent and significant writer and thinker. And they were just saying to him, "Oh, well, you call yourself a primitivist, but how did you get here in the first place? Eh? Did you row over the Atlantic in a wooden boat or something?" And he was like, you know, it's my philosophy. That's what, you know, I'm not claiming to be the incarnation of a post-industrial society. You know, you wear spectacles. How come you wear spectacles? They must be made in a factory. You know, well, yes, because I don't want to get run over next time I cross the road. I have to see. I do live in this world, you know, unfortunately, right. And that really struck me as. I just was struck by the stupidity of that, and this same stupid level seems to, you know, I've seen that so much at the beginning of all this COVID stuff, and even before with the, you know, when we were Corey Morningstar and others have been criticizing, calling out the climate capitalist thing. You had this sort of really sort of half-witted response from certain so-called anarchists, just saying, No, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist now. Yeah. Oh, you were retweeted by someone who once retweeted someone who was blah, blah, blah. And, you know, it's like you're 13 again at school.
It does feel like that.
You're part of that group.
Right.
No, you're on that side of the lunchroom. You can't be with us.
Right. It's very...
We're not friends with you anymore.
Well, what about the more the environmental stuff? You said, have you always been sort of on that side of the thinking? Because I have. I mean, it's always been part of where I'm at.
Yeah, it always has been part of my thinking. Although, I mean, I've always tried as an anarchist. I've always tried to be an anarchist without adjectives, so as to not to label myself. I did write something for Green Anarchist years ago. And but I've never labelled. I've always, until recently anyway, tried to remain above all the different subsections, because to me, I mean, I would argue that anarchism includes an environmental perspective. But
I would agree.
Right.
That's my personal view. But I've always been happy to work alongside people who put the emphasis more on class struggle on other aspects, as long as they don't exclude the environmental one.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and that I think is a big issue, because that's where we run into issues with a lot of the Marxist friends that we have. I mean, aside from their proclivity for embracing the state, is the idea of industrialism as being a means of improving the world, whereas I find it to be the detriment of the world. I mean, just the very nature of it.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing that we really like about you is that you really define capitalism by calling it industrial capitalism. I mean, I think that there's a lot of writers and researchers out there that talk about capitalism in this amorphous, big. It's like the word with the big C, but they don't really understand that it's industrial capitalism that's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, industrialism is capitalism. I mean, capitalism couldn't do what it does now without the existence of its industrial infrastructures, and we wouldn't have industrial society if it wasn't for capitalism, which is something I agree with capitalists on. They all say, "Wow, if it wasn't for capitalism, you wouldn't have all this." And yeah, true.
You're right.
I wish we didn't have all this because look where it's getting us. But it's there to make money. People, it's not about it's not an abstract. Industrialism or technology isn't neutral, as people are always trying to claim, and particularly Marxist or that certain type of industrial leftist always says. I remember somebody saying that to me at a talk a few years ago at I think it was Cardiff Anarchist Book Fair or something like that, and somebody said to me, "Oh, well, hang on, Paul. There, you can't. Don't want to come over all primitivist there, because after all, it's not about the technology itself. It's about who owns the technology and to what use they're put." And so I said, "Well, yeah, okay. So you're saying that a nuclear power station would be all right if it was owned by a workers' co-op?" Well, I'm not sure. They weren't. I don't know. Had they not thought that through? I suppose nuclear power station is taking it to an extreme. They were thinking more in terms of a factory making furniture or something like that.
Right.
Which is sort of lesser sort of industrialism. But it's not. The point is, you wouldn't have big industry if it was just to make things that we all needed and we wanted to share amongst ourselves. If it was based on our needs, our collective needs, you wouldn't have industrial society. You wouldn't need to be producing all this massive amount of not just electricity, but not cars, factories producing other machines that are going to produce other products. The momentum behind all this is making money. That's the key point. It's a commercial society. First, you have a commercial society, which needs to make more and more money in order to continue, because the investment needs to keep reaping profit for the people that have invested it. That's their gravy train. Commercialism is the gravy train of the financiers. So to start with, you had commercial society, trade, and the rest of it. Well, that's not enough. Agriculture is not enough. We've got to have more and more and more. And in order to have more and more and more, you've got to have more and more things to make more and more other things. And you've got to have cheaper and cheaper ways of doing it to keep the profit up. So people have got to become more profitable. So, the old way of running factories wasn't good enough. So you get Taylorism comes in, and, people have got to be reduced to this function of doing everything chunk, 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 chunk in the most immediately profitable way. They've got to not have as long lunch breaks and stop talking to each other when they're working. And that's what's been happening for hundreds of years now. And this is what we're seeing now is just the end result, isn't it? This threatened new normal is the logical conclusion, or maybe it's not the conclusion, and they've got yet another horrific phase waiting for us after this one.
Right. Yeah.
I know. It's in fact, everything we've seen up to now. Yeah.
Well, I was going to transition into that, and I know we're coming up on the end of the hour, but I just wanted to point out, and something that you were talking about in your review of Bright Green Lies is, it's all about making more stuff and like making windmills and making solar and all these things have to come from somewhere. The one quote that I saw in there was about the shipping, about how the ships that take the solar panels or the windmill parts or whatever put as much pollution into the world as I forget how many cars, but it was like a lot. It was
the quote was that it's either 15 or 16 biggest ships in the world produce as much pollution as all the cars in the world.
Yeah.
And that was sourced from the Guardian, actually. I did check up because I thought that can't be right, can it? And I think that apparently it is, you know. So.
Yeah, and just the so the idea of replacing good industrial output with the bad industrial output, and this drive for especially within the Davos and global governance kind of push here in the green capitalism, this idea of like making everything electrified now, electric cars and electric trains, electric this, electric that, and it's like, well, great, yeah, it's not coming out of the tailpipe, but
Yeah.
It's coming out of the global south. All of the necessary components to electrify your life are ravaging
other parts of the world.
Out of sight, out of mind. Where it's not intruding on my little comfortable reality. So no problem. Yeah, there's a lot of people around here who are going around now on electrical bikes.
Yeah.
Well, maybe there's something to be said for electric bikes if they replace cars. But if they're replacing pedal bikes, they're far from being clean, aren't they? They're going in the wrong direction there.
Right.
They're just too lazy to cycle up the hill. I'm sorry, they're on the wrong side of history.
Right.
I have to agree. I mean, I've been a cyclist, an everyday cyclist, not the spandex type, but like, I wear the clothes that I'm going to, be where I'm,
Right.
Anyway, I go to get the groceries and things like that.
Potting soil.
Potting soil. Anyway, and I was seeing people more and more on the bike lane, in San Francisco, especially on electric bikes. And it would just drive me crazy because it's like, yeah, you don't want to show up to work sweaty. Gosh, I'm so sorry. Or whatever the case may be. I mean, it is hilly in San Francisco, but I had friends who were longtime cyclists who were just like, that's what you do. You just put it into another gear and go up the hill. And Pittsburgh is also a very hilly place, and but I'm not seeing the people riding the e-bikes, the electric bikes, who are doing it to get around the hills. They're just doing it to be because it's easy.
Right.
And cool, perhaps, as well. Cool and trendy.
Yeah.
Trendy. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, we're a little bit past the hour. We have truly enjoyed speaking with you, and we're so thrilled and honored that you joined us today for this episode of Pullquote. We would love to invite you back.
Yeah, if you're interested, we'd love to have you come back and talk more.
We can win. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We can win John more about electric bikes.
Yeah, there's plenty more.
I'm quite capable of whinging on endlessly about all manner of things. So give me a 5-hour slot next time. Yeah.
Okay, you're on.
That's funny.
Great. Well, stand by. We're gonna close the show, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah. Thanks,
all right.
Paul.
Cool. So that was Paul Cudenec of Winter Oak, and that was pretty much a highlight for us.
Yeah, that was a really wonderful show. If you are on Twitter, he's at Winter Oak. You can also go to winteroak.co.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I actually have the website here. Hang on a second.
You'll find him on Winter Oak when you do a search, and you can find all of his work there. It's and also the book. What's his latest book?
Oh well, I had it written down here.
So winteroak.org.uk.
Yeah.
Is where you want to go.
Yeah, and his latest book is Enemies of the Modern World, and you can find that in the books section of Winter Oak.
Right.
Okay.
Are they saying this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can find all his work there, and thank you for joining us today. And we hope that you got something out of this. Don't forget to sign up for Rockfin, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and we will see you next time.
All right, great.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Book of Hours are artists here to empower and embolden your response to the constant negative sound bites that attack your news and social media feeds. In order to continue making the video essays and art you've come to enjoy, we need your support. Make a one-time donation or become a patron. Thank you.